Hey, what's going on everybody? So in this video, I want to show you how you can use JSON web tokens with Django and React to add an authentication into your project. Now, with this, I also want to put a special emphasis on refresh tokens. So I have a lot of questions about this and I don't see that many videos implementing this. So what I want to do is cover things like how we can use a refresh token to update an access token, how we can rotate refresh tokens, and also how we can blacklist refresh tokens. So with that, we're also going to start from scratch where we'll set up our Django project and we'll add in the Django REST framework and a package called Simple JWT. So Simple JWT is going to allow us to change our authentication system in Django. So we're going to use the JSON web tokens for that. Now in the front end, we're also going to use React. So we're actually going to create these as two separate projects. And we're going to make requests to the backend to get that token, and then we'll store that token somewhere in the browser, and that's how we know which user is logged in. So before we get started, I'm going to assume you already know a little bit about Django, React, and refresh tokens, because I'm not going to be focusing on the core concepts here. We're just going to focus on how we can implement this and focus on that actual authentication flow here. So let's go ahead and take a look at this project before we get started. So this is a simple two-page project. We can see that this is React on the front end and it's calling Django in the back end to connect to things. So here we have a simple login page. If I try to go to the home page, what's happening here is immediately it's hitting a private route and it knows that I'm not logged in, so it redirects me back to the login page. So that's actually something we'll build into this project. So we're gonna know how to build in those private routes. And now if I log in, I can actually see this user's information along with any database tables that are going to connect to that user. So in this case, later on in the project, I'm going to create like a notes table and we'll be able to get that specific user's notes here. So what's happening here is in this entire process, there's different ways in how we can actually refresh that token. So if I open up my inspect element here and go into application, we're actually storing this token inside of local storage here. So right here, we see an access and a refresh token, and it's kind of this long character here, or it's a really long character here, so it's kind of hard to see all of it. But what's happening here is every 5 minutes, I'm gonna make a request to the backend, and we're gonna use this refresh token to update this access token. So if you understand how access and refresh tokens work, typically you have an access token that stores all the information about a user, and a refresh token that has a longer lifespan is meant to simply get a new access token. So we have a short lifespan on that access token, typically 5 to 15 minutes, depending on how long you want to set that for. And then a refresh token would change depending on how secure you want your application, or maybe how sensitive that information is. In this case, we can set that to a day, we can set that to 30 days or even a year, and always just make sure that a user can be logged in whenever they go to this website, as long as they were authenticated at one point. So we're going to build all this in here, and that's how we're storing that. So there's different ways of doing this. I know some people like to use Axios, and Axios has this, let's see, I forgot what that was called here. It's called an interceptor, and Axios actually has this thing where whenever you make a request, if that request fails, this interceptor catches it, it generates a new token, and then it proceeds with that original request again. That's one way to do that. We can also do that with fetch. I'm actually probably going to make a video with Axios and fetch after this to show you how to do that. But in this case, because those require a little bit more configuration, we're just going to use the method of updating it every single 5 minutes. So as we're working through this application, we'll make that request, we'll update that access token, and we'll also generate a new refresh token and then update our local state along with the local storage. So that's going to be the entire application here. So let's just go ahead and actually start building this in. So I'm going to close out this demo and I'm going to turn off the servers for that demo. Just get everything closed out here. And let's start a new project here. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and open up my command prompt. I'm going to use Windows here. And let's just go ahead and get this started. So I'm going to store my project on my desktop. And for this, I'm going to create a virtual environment. So I'm going to use virtual env to create one. And I'm not going over all the basics. So if you don't know how this setup works, I'd highly recommend you try to understand how to install virtual env in Django and how to get that configured. So I'm going to create a virtual environment called env. We'll get that set up, and then I'm going to add that virtual environment into my Django project. So we'll just activate that. We'll just do env scripts and then activate. And we'll just go ahead and do pip install Django. So that'll give me the latest version of Django. We'll get that set up here. And once that's ready, we're just going to go ahead and open up the text editor. So that's going to take a second here. Okay, so now we have Django installed, so I can go ahead and run django-admin start project. And we're going to call this project backend. So the Django side will just be called backend. The React side we'll just call front end. So I just want to make sure that's simple to follow and we just have two different sides of things. So we'll go ahead and start configuring the backend right now. So what I like to do is actually take this virtual environment and bring that into my Django project. So that's what that command did. It just set up the boilerplate files. You should be familiar with that already. So let's go ahead and open up our text editor. And for this, I'm going to use VS Code here. So we'll go ahead and find this project. So I'm going to use this terminal now. We'll go into open folder. And I just need to find this in the desktop here. That's where I have the project. And we're just going to open up the backend folder that we just created. So I'm going to open up this terminal right now. And the first thing I want to do is make sure the virtual environment is on. So it's already activated. If not, just go ahead and activate that. And you should be familiar with this. All we need to do now is just run python manage.py start app. And we're going to call this base. So we're just going to create an app for our Django project. So if you know Django, you know that Django is comprised of multiple apps. So we want to run this command from the Django project. So make sure you're CD'd into the Django project. Okay, so let's quickly configure this app here. We'll go into settings.py. We'll go in here, installed apps right here. We'll just go into base.apps. So we're going into the apps folder inside of base, and we're going to configure this to the base config class here. So we just configured this, and I'm going to go ahead and just run these installs. It's asking me for this highlighting for Python here. So we're just going to go ahead and hit yes. We'll make sure all of this is complete. If you see that question, just go ahead and decide on what settings you want. I'm just going to confirm it, and that'll run that installation. Okay, so I just wanted you to see that. So now that we have our app configured, let's go ahead and set up our API here. So we configured the app in here, and some people like to create their API as an app. What I like to do is typically keep my API separate from the app, because the app has anything like files like the models file for the database, any other kind of logic. So I like to keep things separate. So instead of actually creating another app for our API, what I'm going to do is actually create the API folder inside of the base app here. So we're going to create a new folder inside of base, if you called it that. And we're just going to call this API. So because we only have one app, that's why I'm going to do things this way. And inside of API, I'm going to create a new file called _init _.py. And the API will actually have its own views file. So we won't use the views from base. And it's also going to have its own URLs. So we'll just do urls.py. And we are also going to want some serializers. So let's do serializers.py. And those are going to come later, but I just want to make sure the API folder is complete. So views, URLs, serializers, and init. So let's go ahead and actually make sure the views and URLs are configured here. So we'll go ahead and close out init, and we'll start with the views. So before we install the Django REST framework, I just want to make sure that the views are working. So from django.http, import JSON response, and we'll create a view that's going to show us all the endpoints in our application. So this will be kind of like some documentation for our app. So you can go here and see all the routes that you can actually visit. So we're going to call this get routes, and we'll pass in request here. Again, if you know all of this, you can zoom right through this. We're just setting up the API, and then we're going to install the JSON web tokens. So we'll do return, and we'll just do JSON response. We're going to return routes. That's going to be a list that we're going to create in a second, and safe can be false. And safe just basically means that we can render out anything more than just a Python dictionary. So it's going to basically serialize that information for us. So we'll create the list here, and at this point, we're going to prefix everything with the route of API / and then what endpoint that we want to use. So we're going to set that to token. That's going to be the first endpoint. This is where you can actually submit a username and password, and you will get back a access and a refresh token. Now the next route is going to be API / token / refresh. And this will give you a new token based on a refresh token that you sent to the backend. So these are our two routes here. And now we want to create some URLs for this. So we're going to do from Django.urls import path. So we need the path method. We also need access to our views. So we're going to do from dot, and then we're going to import views. So we'll get the views imported, and let's create the URL pattern. So we'll just do URL patterns. We'll create that, and that's going to be using the path method. The first route is going to be an empty string. This is going to show our routes here, and we'll just go into views.getRoutes. Okay, so we have a URL that points to this view right here, and those are all inside of the API folder, not inside of base. So we have two different views files, and now we just need to configure these URLs to our main application. So let's go ahead and configure that. So we'll go into the backend folder. We'll go into the root directories URLs file. Let's just go ahead and get rid of all these comments. I just want to clean this up a little bit. And in here, we're going to need to add in the include method, and we'll create a new path here. So this path is going to send the user to the API folder. So we're going to set the route. We're going to prefix everything in this URLs file with API. So we're just going to do API / and when a user goes to this route, we're going to send them to base.api.urls. So we're just sending the user to this URLs file, and this file right here will take care of all the URL routing. So in here, this is why we don't need to add an API, because it's already prefixed right here. So let's go ahead and test this. So we want to turn on our server. We'll just do python manage.py run server, get that going. And we see unapplied migrations. We're not worried about that right now. And let's just go ahead and open up port 8000. So it tells me my project is active on port 8000. What I like to do is actually go ahead and add that as a tab here, but I could just paste that in like this, and we should see this. So if you see this, that's fine. We're seeing this error because we only have the route for the admin panel, which we can't use because we haven't ran our migrations, and we have this API route. So we'll go to that route, and here we go. We see these two routes inside of this array, or I guess Python list. So the API folder is configured. So let's just go ahead and open up Django REST framework. So let's go ahead and install this and make sure that we're actually using this instead of just that JSON response. So the first thing I want to do is run this install. So pip install Django REST framework as one word. We'll get this installed. So I'll just go ahead and open up a new terminal. So my server is still on, and we'll just clear this. I'll do python -m, and then I'll just paste that in. So pip install Django REST framework. That'll get that installed. And in the documentation, it also tells me to add it to installed apps. So we'll take this value right here, and we'll bring that in. So we'll take this and add it to installed apps. We'll minimize this or close that out, and we'll leave our server on. And let's go into settings and paste that in. Okay, so REST_framework. So that's it. So to configure the REST API or the Django REST framework, that's all we need to do. And now we just want to update our URLs. So, or not the URLs, but the views. So I'm going to leave JSON response because maybe I can use that later. But for now, I'm just going to go into from REST_framework. This is all in the documentation. And we're just going to go ahead and get response. So REST framework response, we're going to import the response object. So it's kind of like JSON response, but it has a lot more to it. So we're going to use this. And the cool thing about response is we don't need to use the save method right here, and it gives us like a decorated response to our endpoint. Now, we're going to use function-based views, not class-based views. So for this, we're going to need a decorator. So we're going into from REST_framework.decorators, and we're going to import the API_view decorator. So we'll bring this in, and in order to use response, you need the API decorator or the API view. So we'll go ahead and add that to the top of the view. And this just takes a list of HTTP methods that we can send to this view. So at this point, we're only going to allow a GET request. You can also set put, delete, post, etc. So as long as you have the decorator imported and added right here, you can use the response method. And if I save it, if I go to that same endpoint and refresh it, we should now get a different interface, but it looks like I have an error. So what I need to do is just go ahead and run some migration. So let's actually just go ahead and turn off our server, and we'll just do python manage.py migrate, and we'll just run the initial migrations. I didn't realize that was going to cause an error. So Let's turn the server back on and let's check this out. So if I go back here, refresh it, here we go. So the same response, but now I get this interface. So I'm not going to go into why this is so cool and what it does basically, but it's the Django REST framework. You should be familiar with this part of things. So we see our same response, but we have extra information. So we know everything's connected. And let's go ahead and actually start using Simple JWT to actually work with the authentication or the access and refresh tokens. So if we go into the Django REST framework documentation, there should be a part that talks about authentication. So we'll go into authentication, and there's many different ways we can handle authentication, but what I want to use is the JSON web token. So let's see if I could scroll around here. I should find it somewhere right here. So JSON web tokens. So JSON web tokens, there's different ways we can do things. There's HAWK HTTP authentication. There's this signature authentication. We're just going to use this JSON web token authentication, and we're going to click on this link. And that's going to take us to Simple JWT. So it's just a package that allows us to work with this. So let's go ahead and actually check out the official documentation. So down here from that link, this should be the documentation to Simple JWT. So we also need to install this. So we're going to go ahead and run this pip install. So pip install Django REST framework as one word - Simple JWT. So we need to install it and then change our Django application to handle or to use this for authentication. So I'll open up a new terminal and clear that, and I'll just do Python -m, and I'm going to paste in pip install Django REST framework -Simple JWT. So I have that installed here, and I also need to configure it. So we need to let Django know that we're trying to use this instead of whatever is set up there by default. So we're just going to override this method right here, or this variable inside of settings.py. So it's all in the documentation here. It's telling me to do this in settings.py. So let's copy that. We'll close this out. We'll go into settings, and I'm just going to add this under installed apps here. So we'll paste this in, and I'm just going to get rid of these three dots right here to get rid of that right there. And now it's telling Django use Simple JWT for authentication. So there's a lot of different configuration we can do here, but we're going to leave it like that. Now, in order to actually work with this, we're going to start customizing this in a second, but we want to use these built-in views to get the token, the access and refresh token, and also create the endpoint to refresh a token. So let's go ahead and actually copy this right here too. So we'll bring this into urls.py, and I'm just going to paste this in right here. So this is inside of that API folder. So we're going to bring this in, and it gives us two different views we can work with. So we'll go back here, and let's just take these two paths right here. So we'll copy that. And if you don't have the documentation, you can just follow this and type it in. Just look at what I'm doing here. So I want to make sure you can see this. So we just pasted this in, and we don't need to prefix it with API because we already have that. So I can get rid of this. But now we have two different endpoints, one for token, and that uses the token obtain pair view class here, and then you have to use as view because it's a class-based view, and then it gives it a name. Now for this view, it's token refresh. That's what I put into those routes into that view here. So let's go ahead and save this, and it's going to use these right here. So we'll save this, and let's just go ahead and open this up and test this. So we'll go to our API, let's refresh it, make sure it's all working, and let's go to token. Okay, so the first thing it's telling me is that this method is not allowed here. So this is already built in. All I had to do was use that class. Simple JWT does this for me. Now, what I need to do is create a user and log this user in. I don't have a user right now. I just migrated my database. So what I need to do is quickly create a user, because if I try to submit this post request, which I'll just hide my face here. If I try to submit this post request, it's not going to do anything. So if I submit it, it's going to say there is no user with these credentials. We don't know who you're looking for. So it's going to try to make that request. It won't find anyone. So we need to go ahead and create a user. So let's go ahead and go back to the terminal. We'll do Python manage.py, create super user as one word. You should already know all of this. Let's create a user. I'm just going to call my user Dennis at email.com. We're going to use a fake email, and I'll add in a password. It's going to ask me to confirm the password. And now that user is created. So my server is still on. So let's go ahead and actually try this again. So we'll submit this request, and the password should be pre-filled already. So I'll just go ahead and refresh this. And I use the same password that I always use for testing. So we'll just go ahead and submit the post request. And this is what the view does for me. So we get back a refresh token and we get back an access token. So this access token is actually going to store information about my user. So I didn't want to get too much into how JSON web tokens work, but there is a website that you can use. It's called JWT.io. And I just want to show you what this access token contains. So this is the token that we need in the front end. I'll try to zoom in a little bit. This is the token that we need in the front end in order to store in that inside of our local storage and inside of our state in the front end to make sure that a user is authenticated. So we're going to go ahead and take this token. Let's just copy the entire access token. And if I go to JWT.io and scroll down here, I can see this area to add in an encoded token. So basically this is like user information encoded, and we can actually paste this in here and it will decode it. So Django already knows how to decode it, but it's all encrypted right now. So if I paste this in right here, it decodes this token, and we can see this token right here and information about it. So it knows our username, so that's a user in the database. It tells us when it's expired and more information about it. And it also tells us the algorithm used to encrypt this token and basically all sorts of information about the user and the token. So that's what it does for us. Now, if I take this refresh token, I can actually take this refresh token. Let's go ahead and get the one on top here. Let's go ahead and go to the endpoint of refresh. So we'll just do token/refresh. Now this endpoint simply takes in this refresh value here. So we need to take this refresh token and we just need to paste it in here. So you can use the raw data right here. This is actually how you would send it from the front end, as long as it has the value of refresh. We send this value with a post request. We submit that and it gives us back a new access token. So we get back a new token and we now have a new lifespan. So let's talk about this token configuration. So if we go back to this documentation, we can go to customizing token claims. So I'm going to bring my face down here and I'll just minimize it because I want to make sure it doesn't block anything here. So if we go to customizing token claims, we can see all this information about how we can work with this. So let's see, we want to go back here and I think it's in settings. So in settings right here. So we need to configure, or we can configure our token inside of settings.py with all this information. So this is actually the default configuration for a token. So let's take all of this right here. So it's inside of that URL. So make sure you follow that if you want to look this up. Let's take this entire configuration right here and let's paste this into settings.py. So we'll bring this in here and we'll go into settings.py and let's add this just underneath rest_framework. So we'll bring this in right here. And what I want to do here, first of all, is remove the 3 dots here. I want to take this time value, or this date time value, and I want to paste that up here by base dir. So we'll bring that in. And I also want to just go ahead and remove the signing key. So if I remove it, it's still going to be there. It's just basically allowing us to override the default settings. So here's where we can actually really customize a lot of information about our tokens. So the first thing is the access token lifetime and refresh token lifetime. So the access token has a shorter lifespan, and this is what we need to update. So we use the refresh token to update the access token. So 5 minutes is actually pretty good. I can always change this. I can set it to a couple of days. I can set this to 15 minutes or whatever. I'm going to leave it at 5 minutes. So I want my token to expire after 5 minutes, but the refresh token, I want to make sure that lasts, let's say 90 days. So a refresh token should last a little bit longer, because if a user logs into their application, let's say you logged into facebook.com or Twitter, you don't want to have to log in every single day. If you're using it, you want to be able to open up your app or go to the website and still be logged in. So that's what the refresh token does for us. As long as the refresh token is active, then we just use that token to update this shorter token. So we always want to make sure that we're storing both of these tokens and that the refresh token has a longer lifespan. But if this was like a bank website, you might want to maybe make this lifespan shorter. So it really depends on what you're trying to do with your application. Now, rotating refresh tokens, this is also something that's really cool here. So when we rotate a refresh token, let's say we use this refresh token. So we'll go back to our website. Let's get a new token here. So we'll go to API/token. So we'll go here, we'll log in, so we'll submit our username and password, and let's get this refresh token. So I just want to explain this concept here. So if I go to refresh, and if I paste in the refresh token, all it's going to do is give me a new access token, and that's it. Now, if the 90 days expire here, let's say the user's been logged in for 90 days, what's going to happen is that refresh token will now expire, and that's it. So we want to change that. So if a user is logged in, let's say the refresh token lasts 90 days, but if a user persists in the website, they stay logged in, we want to create like a rolling window and always generate a new refresh token for that user. So after 90 days, they don't have to log in as long as they've been active on the website. Now, if they haven't used it for 90 days, that means no refresh token has been generated and the user should be logged out. But as long as they continue using it, the user does not have to continuously log in. So to update this, all we do is go to rotate refresh token and we set that to true. So at this point, what I'm going to do is go ahead and use this refresh token. And now when I submit it, we don't just get back an access token. Let me try to zoom in here. We also get a new refresh token. So the refresh token will be updated. We want to get this new token, store this somewhere inside of our application, and now a user is logged in from the point of when that refresh token was updated. So it's always going to be rotating, and that date that it expires will always keep rolling or moving away because the user is still logged in. Now there is one issue in here. Let's say I want to get this new token. So I'm going to copy this new token right here, and we're just going to send this again. So we got this token inside of our browser and we want to paste that in. That's going to go ahead and generate a new access token and a new refresh token for the user. Now, this can create kind of an issue because I can actually take that refresh token that I just used and I can use it again. So it generates a new access and a refresh token, and it can be used as much as possible. So I can continuously use the old refresh tokens. Now, this is really dangerous if somebody gets a hold of these refresh tokens, because now they can generate their own access tokens. And if we lost this information, we want this to expire or just, I guess, have a minimal or allow it to be displayed or used as little as possible. So we basically, what we want, that was my horrible explanation of that, but basically what happens is once the token is used, we want to blacklist it so it doesn't exist anymore and only the most recent refresh token can be used. So if I take this token and use it, let's say I paste this in, I should not be able to use that token again. I should need this new refresh token because it's really dangerous if somebody gets that token. So we want to blacklist this token now. So what I can do here is actually go into Simple JWT and I can say blacklist after rotation. So after the token rotates, do I want to blacklist this? So I can go ahead and set that to true. And now this will allow my token to be blacklisted, but I need to actually add in some configuration for this. So let me just check my notes here. So inside of installed apps here, let's go ahead and actually look this up here. So it should be somewhere here. So rotate refresh token, blacklist refresh token. So once we set that to true, all I need to do is add in rest_framework_simple JWT token.blacklist. So we want to take this value and we want to add this into installed apps. So that's going to add an app to our application. Now, once we do this, we need to run a migration because what it's going to do is create a database table, and every single time a token is rotated, it's going to take that old refresh token and it's going to add it to that database table, and these will be a list of blacklisted tokens. So if somebody tries to use that again, it won't allow it because it's going to check the database and it's going to say, hey, this token has been blacklisted. Don't allow this user. So that's what's happening here is we add that in here. And we also add in blacklist after rotation and we set that to true. So we need to run a migration. Now it says we have 10 unapplied migrations. So we'll open up a new terminal here. We'll clear that and we'll just do Python manage.py migrate, and it will add that database table. So my server is still on. So let's check this out. So we'll go back to the front end and let's go ahead and take this refresh token right here. So we're going to copy this and we're going to paste this into refresh. So if I post that, it's going to give me back a new access and a new refresh token. But if I try to use that original token again, it's been blacklisted now. So if I try to paste that in, let's say someone steals this information and they want to use this again, if I submit that, Now it tells me token has been blacklisted, token is not valid. That's the status code, and the token is blacklisted, so it blocks the user from being able to reuse that after it's been used once. So that makes our application much more secure. Now, before we move on to the front end, because we're almost ready to start using this, we first want to customize what the user response looks like, and then we want to be able to modify or set up the course configuration. So 1 second here, let me bring this in, or let's remove this and let's go back to token. So let me explain what's going on here. So when I log a user in, we're gonna get back an access token. So we're actually gonna decode this token in the front end, and we wanna get some user information from this. So let's take this access token, let's bring this into JWT.io. If I paste this in, at this point, we only get the token type, the user ID, and basic information about this user. So we want to be able to customize this so we actually get back a username. So we can actually customize token claims. So right here, if we go into the documentation in Simple JWT, we can go to customize token claims, and it tells us how we can do this. So what I'm going to do is quickly just grab these two imports right here, and I'm going to bring this into my views. So basically what we're going to do is actually override this view, and we're going to use our customized version of that view. So we'll bring this into our views. We'll paste this in so we have a serializer that it works with and a token obtain pair view, which is also being used right here. So let's go back to the documentation. So we made those two imports, and what we want to do is take these two classes right here. So let's take these two values, and I'll make sure you can see that in frame if you want to code that out yourself. And I actually need to go back to our views here, and let's bring this in above right here. So we have the token obtain pair serializer, which inherits from this value that we imported. You can go into the GitHub documentation or the source code and actually see how this is configured. But basically what it's telling us here is we can go ahead and customize the token claim right here. So we can take this token and we can add any value we want in here. So in this case, I want to also encrypt the user's name. So we have the user object right here, and we're going into user.username. So that's going to be encrypted into the token. We're going to take this serializer, and we're also going to add that as the serializer class. So we extend the serializer with all the other values that it has. We add in this value. So token is basically just a dictionary right here that's encrypted. We add in the username from the user object. That value is derived from the actual token. We encrypt this value and then we return it, and we add that as a serializer class. So what I can actually do is take this value now. So remember, it's token obtain pair view, and we just added the word my. So it just basically means that this is our customized version of this. So if we go back to URLs here, we can see token obtain pair view. So we're no longer using this. We're going to use our own custom value. So we're going to paste in my token obtain pair view. So what I'm going to do here is actually just import that manually. So we're going to do from.views, and then we'll import my token obtain pair view. So we want to import that so we can use that right here. Okay, so now if we get the response, we're not going to see much of a difference until we decode this. And this is something that we're actually going to decode in the front end. So if I refresh this, let's go ahead and make sure we get back everything again. Let's go ahead and submit our username and password. We'll submit the post request. So I'll just move my face up here. We'll submit that request. And now we get a refresh token and an access token. So it all looks the same here. So we're just going to take this access token right here, copy that, and we'll go into JWT.io. So we're actually going to do all of this in the front end. I'm just using this to show you. So at this point, we see the token type, expiration, user ID, and so on. So if I paste in the new token, now we see username right there. So we encrypted that username value inside of the token. So in the front end, this is how we're able to get that username right away. Now, you could leave it with the ID, take this ID and make another request for the user information, but it doesn't hurt us to add this in directly in here so we can access it immediately. Now, other user information you can store in a different way, but I want to get that user information right here directly. So this is how we did it. We just simply customized the serializer that works with that. We got that from the documentation, created the new view by inheriting from the original view, and then we used the custom view inside of the URLs right here. Now the token refresh view, well, we're going to leave that because there's not much we want to customize there. Okay, so we have most of our application done here. We're almost ready to use our API, and we have one final step before we can build out the front end and actually make requests to this. So at this point, what we need to do is work on CORS configuration. So CORS stands for Cross-Origin Resource Sharing. I think I have that right. But basically what's going to happen here is we're going to have our React project as a completely different folder, and that's going to be running from port 3000. Django right now is running on port 8000. So basically what's going to happen is the origin from where that request is being made from the front end, it's going to be on a different URL, or the endpoint is going to be different. So Django is going to look at this request and say, I don't know who you are, I don't trust you, so it's going to block that request. So we need to configure it to where we can either allow any kind of request to this backend, we can give it a specific list of URLs to actually allow. There's different ways we can do it, but basically we need to make sure that the API is available from this endpoint. Now, I just want to quickly look this up real quick. So we'll just do CORS error. And if you see this, this is what the issue is. So I just want to pull up this image because in the URL, you'll see something like this if you try to make a request. Now, you might not notice it right away because it's going to be in the network call. But if you're trying to make these requests and you're wondering why the API is breaking or why that request isn't working, probably because of this if you haven't configured this yet. So let's go ahead and quickly just run through this, and I'm going to move my face down here. Actually, I guess that's probably a good size right there, and I'll just zoom in. So it looks something like this. Well, I guess there's a bunch of documentation on it, but this error is seen by a lot of people. A lot of people run into this. So there is actually a package that we can use. It's called Django CORS headers. So let's go ahead and open this up and let's follow the instructions here. So this is the GitHub repo. It tells us how to use it. So we're going to want to quickly just run this install. So it's pip install Django-CORS-headers. We're going to install it, and then we need to add that to installed apps. So there's about 3 different steps that we need to run through here. So we'll open up our terminal. We'll open up a new terminal. I'll just clear this, paste that in. So Python-m pip install Django CORS-headers. So you can just get that from the documentation, and we'll just clear this. So that's installed now, and I just need to add this to installed apps. We'll bring that in. We'll go ahead and minimize that. We'll go here under REST framework. We'll add in a comma just to make sure that's there, and we'll add in CORS-headers. So one final step here, all we need to do, or 2, I guess, we first need to add this to our middleware. So we'll bring this in. We'll go back to settings.py. We'll bring this in right here. So let's just put this under our security middleware, and I'll create some space so we can see what we added and what was originally there. Now, this is that step that I was telling you about when we can configure how we want to set this up. So there's CORS allow origins, or CORS allowed origins, and this is basically a list of URLs that we want to allow to our API. Now, we can also use regex or regex. That's going to basically allow us to configure things in a different way. So here's the allow origins. It's basically saying these are the URLs that are allowed to make requests to our API. Now we can use regex for this. We can set up a certain path here, or we could just allow all origins. So CORS allow all origins. This is going to say go ahead and just allow anybody to hit this endpoint right here. So I'm just going to configure this at the bottom of settings.py, CORS allow all origins, and we're going to set that to true. I'm not worried about the details of configuration. It's just locally. We're just trying to use this project right now. So we'll set that up, and that should be it for the backend at this point. So I'll just go ahead and minimize a few things here, or I guess I can leave these open. Doesn't really affect anything. And let's just go ahead and create our React application now. So I'll close all this out. We're gonna leave port 8000 on. That server will be running. And I'm just gonna use my terminal for this, or at this point, and I'm gonna CD into my desktop. So that's where I'm gonna store this project. And you do need to make sure you have Node.js installed, and we're gonna use npx here to execute a command. So we're gonna use npx create-react-app. You should be familiar with this. And we're gonna call this front end like that. So that's gonna create the boilerplate files for our React project. So I told you that we're gonna create the back end and the front end completely separate. So it's gonna take a minute or 2 to run through this. We can see the front end folder right here and the back end folder. So what I'll do is just let this run through. I might just pause it if it takes a minute, and we'll just cut it at this point. Okay, so the React project just finished setting up here. So we'll just go ahead and close out that command prompt, and I'm going to open up another VS Code terminal here to access that part of things. So we'll open up a new window. So I'm just going to, I guess, work on them from two different VS Code projects. We're not going to put it into one folder just yet. So we'll go into the desktop, and I'm going to open up front end. So I have a folder for the backend and front end. So I have both of these opened up. So make sure your server on the backend, the Django server, is not off. Make sure it's running because we are going to need to access this. So we'll go ahead and open up the front end now, and we're just going to work on them separately. So before we get started, the first thing I want to do is clear this up a little bit. So in source, because we're not going to need app.test and report vitals and setup test, we're just going to delete some stuff here just to keep things clean. It doesn't mean these things aren't important. We're just going to get rid of what we don't need right now. So I'm just going to select all of those, and we'll just hit delete. And all we should have at this point is app.css, app.js, and index.js. Now, before we can actually turn on our server here, let's go ahead and clear this out because Web Vitals is there. That's going to cause an issue. We also don't want to import it because we don't have it. We don't have index.css, and I can save that. So we'll go into app.js. Let's actually go to app.css. We'll select all of this. We'll delete all the styling. I'm not sure if we'll add any styling. I don't think we will, but we'll clear that. We'll go to app.js, and let's just get rid of everything inside of header, and we'll just say home. So we'll just do here is our website or something like that. Here is our React website. Okay, so I just want to make sure everything's running. We'll just do npm start. We'll get that React server on. So npm start. We'll turn that on. That should open this up automatically on port 3000 in a second here. So now we have our backend and we have the front end. And if everything went successfully, we should see this. Nope, I guess I'm not. So it looks like I didn't remove a certain import. So I deleted that logo, so I don't need that there anymore. So just go ahead and refresh that, and here we go. So here is our React website. So what I'm going to do at this point is just go ahead and get some basic configuration set up. So we're going to create a home page, a login page, and then we'll go ahead and build out a header. So the header will store the two links there, and that's where we can create our navigation from. So we'll get that set up really quick. We just want to get some boilerplate, get some boilerplate going, and then we'll use the context API to actually handle state management. So in source, I'm going to create a folder for pages. We're also going to create a folder for components. And let's see. So we're going to create a folder for context. So when we're using the context API, we want to, so context, couldn't spell that. When we're using it, we want to be able to create context or state, I guess, for different parts of our application. So that will be in its own folder, and we'll create a folder for utilities. So utils, and that's going to create just any other functions that we want to store separately. So let's start with our pages. So we'll go into pages, we'll create a new file, and this is going to be called homepage.js. So I have a shortcut here, and this is called let's see, it was ES7, I believe, ES7 code snippets. So this is really convenient because I can install this if you have VS Code, or you can install it, and I'm able to type in these shortcodes, and I'm able to generate imports and also create React components. So you're going to see me use IMD. So let's find this real quick. So IMD is a destructured import, and then IMP is just a standard import. And I can also type in things like React functional component, and that'll just generate these components for me. So if you see me using these shortcuts, it's going to happen really quickly. This is why it's happening. And then I also have something called auto rename tag. So auto rename tag, and this basically means that I can rename an opening tag or a closing tag, and it'll automatically rename the other tag. So it's just going to make things a little bit quicker. Kind of works like this in this demo here. So I'm not sure if you can see that. But yeah, so I'm using those, so that's what's going to happen here. So I can actually do React arrow function component exported, and that's going to generate a component when I hit enter, and the component will be named based off of the file name. So that's what's happening here. So let's just go ahead and add in a p tag here, and we'll just say you are logged in to the home page. Okay, so we're just sending some kind of message to the user. So we have the home component or the home page. We'll create a new page, and we'll just say login page. app.js, and we'll just do RFCE, React. Actually, that's a RAFCE because we're using arrow functions, and you can use whatever you want here. And this will be the login page. So for this, we're going to create a form, and we'll just fill out some information. So we'll create an input value. So we'll do input. Type is going to be text here for the username. We also want to give it a name because we need to access it by this name here. And we'll just say username, and we'll just close this out really quick. And then the placeholder, we'll just say enter username. So if you already know this, just go ahead and finish up this boilerplate. We're creating a form with the type of text, or a field with the type of text, a name of username, and some placeholder information. We're going to create another input value for the password. So this is that login form. Type will be password. If you're using an email for this part, you can do email. Make sure the name is password here. And then we'll just say enter password. Okay, so we have a basic form. We also need a submit button. So we'll paste that in right there. So I just copy this. Type will be submit. And for this, we don't need a name or a placeholder. So we're going to keep our form pretty simple here. We're just prompting the user for their username and password. And let's go into app.js now. So in app.js, this is where we're going to store that main component. We're going to need to use React Router for this. So before we use React Router for our page navigation, let's go ahead and import it. So IMP, that's going to give us a shortcut. It's going to prep a module import, and we can just go into pages, and we're going to get the home page. And if I hit tab here, it'll send me over here, and we can just do home page like that. So we're going to import that. We'll also import the login page. So that's going to give me a destructured import. I need to do IMP with that shortcut. We'll go into the pages folder, and we'll just do /login page, and we'll get login page. Okay, so we have those two imports, and I'm just going to open up my terminal here, and let's just go ahead and open up a new one, and we'll just do npm install react-router-dom. So that's all one word. It looks kind of funny here because of the space that I have because I'm so zoomed in, but that's the installation. So go ahead and run that. Make sure that's from your front end folder. And that's going to take a second and install that for us. So give that a minute. So while that's installing, you can actually look up the documentation for React Router DOM right here, defaulting into explaining everything again. But this is where we can install it, and these are the imports. So we can start with browser router. That's what we're going to do. And we also have links, different routers we can use, and so on. So reactrouter.com, that's the website there. So let's get that installed. That's now installed. I'm going to close this one out. We'll leave the server on though. So let's go ahead and run that import. So IMD from react-router-dom, and we want to import browser router, and we want to import that as router. So we just want to make that shorter, and we also want to import the route. So the router is what's going to wrap our application and allow the entire application to use these different routes and elements from this router. So things like the links and so on. So what we need to do is wrap all of this. So we'll just go ahead and use route. So we're actually using the browser router as router. So we're going to do router, and we're going to wrap everywhere we want these pages to be. So let's just go ahead and bring this in here. We're going to close this out. So it's going to wrap it, and we're going to take this out right here, and we're going to add in a specific route. So instead of adding our components directly, we want to be able to render them as routes. So we'll bring this in right here, and in the route, we need to specify the component that we want to render on a specific route. So the first one will be the home page. We want to specify the path that we are allowing the user to go to that page, or the path that sends the user to this page, and that's just going to be a /. And because this is the home page, we need to add in exact. So exact is going to ensure that when a user goes to, let's say, the login page, we want to make sure we don't render this component out, because every single path technically starts with that /. So exact needs to be there. So we're going to copy this right here, bring this down here. We're going to take this login page value, paste that in. We can now remove exact, and we're going to specify the path as login like that. So we'll set that up. Let's go ahead and check our application out. So we should render out these 2 pages. So you are now logged into the home page, and we'll go to login, and now we have some URL routing. So that's that form we just created here. Okay, so we also need a header. So we want to create some navigation so a user can jump between the 2 pages. So we'll go into components because it's not a page, it's a component that can be reused on multiple pages. So we'll create a new file, and we're just going to call this header.js. So this is a React component, React arrow function component exported. We're going to create the header, and in here, I want to be able to create some links. So we're not going to be using a standard A tag because we're using things with the React router DOM. So React router DOM gives us a value of a link here. So we can create 2 links here. So we'll do link, close that off, and the text in this link will be home. And we'll just go ahead and set the to value. So instead of href, we just do to, and this is going to send the user to the home page. And then this next link right here is going to send the user to the login page. So we'll just do login like that. And I'm just going to add a span tag to create some space between these 2. So we'll just do span, close that off. And let's just add in some space here, and then we'll just do a pipe like that. So if I save this, we can now go back into app.js here. So we want to run an import, and this is now from .components, and we're going into header. We'll bring that in. We'll grab this header, and let's just put this above or inside of the router, but we just want to make sure it's not in a route. We just want to render the component as is. So we can actually just render that out like this, and that'll give us our header. So let's check this out. Now we see login and home, and I can actually switch between the 2 pages. So before we start working with the backend, or before we actually work with it, I want to show you how to create a private route. So a private route is going to be a little bit interesting because all we're going to do is use this route right here, and we're just going to extend that route and basically create like a wrapper around it so it has some extra functionality. And this is where we can check if a user is logged in based on what's inside of local storage. So if a user has a token and is authenticated, we can actually allow a user to access a certain route or block them. So we're just extending this route from React router DOM. So let's see, this is going to be inside of utils here. So inside of utils, that's going to be our utility functions. We're going to create a private route component. So we'll create a new file, and we're going to call this private route.js. So we're creating the private route. Let's just go ahead and build out the entire component. So we're just going to go ahead and import from React-router-DOM. So we want to import this. We want to use route. And we also want to use a method called redirect. So I want to make sure I spelled that right. So we have redirect, and we want to start building out our component. So give me a second here. I have some notes I want to reference here. Just want to make sure I get it all right the first time. So we're going to start creating this component. We're going to set that to const, and we're going to call this private route. So that's our component name. This is going to be an arrow function here. So we're going to go ahead and set this up. We'll create the arrow function, and we're going to return the route here. So we're actually going to take this route method, and this is what we're going to return from this component. So it's the standard route here. There's not much to it. And in here, we're going to pass in or destructure some values. So this is going to be the children. So the component that is passed into private route, which will be the standard route here. So we'll do children. So we're passing in the children, and then we're going to pass in or use a spread operator to get the rest of the parameters. So if you look at app.js, we have these parameters. So we specify the component, the path, and exact, and all these other things about that specific route. So we also need to pass this information down to the private route. So that's going to be inside of REST. So we're basically saying whatever we pass in right here, let that be passed in down here. So we got the children, and we're going to use a spread operator to get everything here. So in this route, all we need to do is use this right here, the 2 curly braces, or create the object, and we'll just pass in REST like that. So we're going to throw that in here, and then inside of the route itself, we'll just pass in children, and that should be it at this point. So the route at this point won't actually stop anyone from going here, but I just want to console something out and make sure it's working. So we'll just say private route works. Okay, so let's test this. So all we're basically doing is extending the route, and we want to see if this even works at this point. So we use a spread operator, we use route, pass in all the children in here, and let's save it. Let's go back to app.js. Let's bring this in above all these components, and we're just gonna run this import. We're going into .utils, and then we're going to private route, and we're gonna import private route. So let's see if we have any errors. It looks good so far. Now we're gonna take this private route, and we're just gonna replace the home page with private route. So if I paste this in here, now instead of route, it's private route. So it should give us the same functionality. The only difference is if it's working, we're gonna see this be consoled out. So let's go ahead and test this out. Looks like something's not imported correctly. So give me a second. Let me try to debug this. So I just need to look at some other source code that I've been using. So we import the private route from, let's see, we go into utils, private route.js. We're gonna save that private route right here. And that should be good at this point. Okay, so it looks like the issue is the fact that I didn't export that. So I need to go ahead and export it. So we'll just do export default. I guess I should have read the error because it told me right there. So export default, and we're just gonna export private route like that. Okay, so that should get rid of this error. So let's check this out. Here we go. So we can go between the two pages. Now we are using private route instead of just a standard route. That just extends route right here. It creates a wrapper. And let's see. So as we go to that home page, we should see that be consoled out. So if I refresh this, we see private route works. So I can go between the two pages and it's all working good. So we officially have the wrapper here. So for this private route, let's create some kind of value before we actually get that token. And let's just try to represent a user that's not authenticated. So we'll just do const, and we'll just do is authenticated. Or let's just do authenticated like this. So authenticated. And let's just set this to false. So the user is not authenticated. So if the user is not authenticated, what I want to do is check a condition here and actually change something up here. So we'll just go ahead and use the not operator. So if the user is not authenticated, so that means that this value is false. What do we want to do here? So at this point, we're just going to create the question mark here, and we're going to redirect a user. So we're going to use this redirect value. We'll paste this in. We're going to redirect a user to the login page, and it's not supposed to have that closing tag here. So we'll send a user to login. So we'll go into login like that. So if the user is not authenticated, we add in the question mark, we send the user to login, else we can use the colon like that. Go ahead and continue on with the request. So we're only going to do this if the user, or if authenticated, is false. So let's save this. We'll go back here. False is not defined. That needs to be lowercase. I was using Python. This is the issue with using multiple languages sometimes. So let's check this out. So if I refresh this, if I try to go to home, let's make sure that you can see everything. So I'll try to zoom in here. So if I try to go to the home page, now it's not letting me. So we officially created a private route, and that's the first step in the front end to actually making sure that we can block users. There's different ways to do this, but I like the idea of just creating a component like this, and then later on you can change this to depend on whether a user has certain permissions. So let's say you have unauthenticated users, you have authenticated users, and then maybe admin users. So depending on what that user's permission is, you can create different types of components to specifically restrict a user. So now that we have the private route, we want to use the context API to start handling our authentication. So I don't want to go over the context API because that's kind of outside of the scope here, but just to give you some reference, if you've ever heard of Redux or MobX, there's different ways of working with these state management systems. Well, the context API is something that's built into React here by default. So just to give you an idea, I just went on Google, looked it up, and I found this example right here. It looks like it was from somebody else's tutorial. It was just on Google Images. And basically, we have this app right here, and we have all these different pages and components. Now, if we want to have access to different parts of our components, we would put that into like a global store, and then those components can be accessed anywhere through the application. We don't need to pass them down through like prop drilling where we pass them down by components. And we also need to be able to update, let's say, something in the header bar all the way from a component down that tree right here through the virtual DOM. So Basically, we're going to store our information about our user. This is why we need it, because a user needs to be available from the header. We want to say hello and then the user's name. Later on, you want to be able to reference user information by certain pages. So that's going to be all inside of a global store. So that's what we're going to use context for. So context is actually very simple to get started with. So we're going to go ahead and build this in, and we can create different types of contexts. These are like different stores. So we created a folder for context, and in this case, we're going to create a context called AuthContext. So we'll do AuthContext.js. So this is going to be our context right here, and we want to run some imports. So we're going to go ahead and import from React here. We're going to import create context. So this is actually how we want to create it. So we have create context. Later on, we're going to want to use state and use effect here. So you might want to be familiar with use state and use effect. I won't be covering those. These are just React hooks, so I won't be going too much into these. So let's go ahead and create our context. So to create it, we're just going to go ahead and set this value. We're going to call this AuthContext, and we're just going to go ahead and use create context. We're going to leave that blank. So we have our context, and typically we can start using this context by exporting this and then simply starting to use this or bringing it into places like our app or our app component. So basically you'd wrap all the components that you want to use the data from your context, and you have consumers and providers. So providers provide the information, whereas consumers receive that information. So I want to build this in a little bit differently. So I'm just going to go ahead and make sure this is exported right away. So we're going to close out the private route for now. We'll close out header, home, login. Let's clean this up a little bit. So our auth context right here, we just created it. We're going to export this as a default export. So we'll just do export default, and we're just going to do auth context. So again, we could just export it and bring it in right here and wrap this information, but we're going to create our provider right here just to clean things up. So sorry if I'm skipping a little bit too far ahead, but once you see how this is built, it's actually going to be very simple. So let's go ahead and export something again. So we're going to create the provider. So we're going to do export const. This will be our auth provider. So this will be the provider to give information to the consumers. So we'll go ahead and create the provider. We're going to destructure children. So everything that we're going to pass through it, and we'll continue on with this function. It will be an arrow function, and we want to set the return value. In the return value, let's go ahead and just use that provider right now. So we're just going to go ahead and go into auth context. So this context right here that we created. So we have auth context dot provider. So you can actually do this directly inside of the app component, but we're going to set this up right here and just extend it. So with a provider, you need to pass in some values here. So let's just say name here, where we'll just create this object. And I believe we can just do it like this, where we pass in name, and then the name will be Dennis at this point. So we're passing in value, and this value is what we want to be available everywhere throughout the application. So we simply use the value property, and we pass in the values right here. So we're actually going to change this up a little bit, but I want to show you how this is working. So we also want to take the children right here. We'll throw that in, so we'll pass that through. And let's go ahead and actually use this. So we'll go into app.js here, and let's go ahead and bring in our auth context. So let's see, I'll bring this in at the top level. So we'll bring in the provider. So we'll just go ahead and destructure it. We'll go into context, and then we'll go into auth context, and we'll bring in our auth provider. Okay, so we're just taking this provider and we're bringing it down into the app.js component. So with this, I can actually wrap all this information. So where do I want this name to be available from? So I want this name to be available in pretty much every component. So I want it to be available in the header, in the home component, and in the login component. Technically, I don't need it in the login component, but I might as well provide it there. It doesn't hurt us. So what I can actually do is take this auth provider, and just like router, all I need to do is wrap all the components that are going to use this information. So we're going to wrap this in. We'll close this off. So we'll do auth provider. We'll paste that. And for some reason, prettier, the extension prettier is not working, so it won't auto format that for me. But now we have this information brought into our app component. So the provider is now going to provide all that information into these components. So to be able to use this, let's actually go to the home component. And at this point, or let's go into the header component. So I can use this in home, login, header, wherever I want it. Let's just go ahead and create this message here, and we'll just say hello, and then we'll pass in the name here. So we'll just do user, or we'll just do name like that. So I think I passed it in as name. So in order to use the name, I need to actually use context. So we'll bring this in. I believe it's from React. We need to destructure this. So we'll just do use context. And let's just go ahead and get this name value. So we'll just do let here. We'll destructure this. So we want to get the name value from use context. And what context do we want to use? Well, in this case, I'm going to use AuthContext. So when I add this in, it should automatically import AuthContext for me. If that doesn't, you might just have to write that out here. So we now have AuthContext. We get the name from AuthContext right here from this provider, and we can get this name value right here. So if I save this, let's check this out. So if I go here, now it says hello Dennis. So that's the core idea of the context provider. So let's go ahead and just comment this out, and let's actually start getting some information. So we first want to allow a user to log in. So at this point, I'm just going to comment that out because we do want to get a username, but not in this way right here. We actually want to get that username from the backend. So we'll go back to AuthContext. Let's take this value right here. Let's remove it. And let's just say user info or context data. So we'll create an object right here in our auth provider, and we'll just do let context data. And this will be an object, and we're going to pass in context data into our context provider. So in here, we're going to have things like the user, or we can actually set it like this. So we'll do user and then any other functions, because we can pass down more than just variables. We can also do functions and so on. So the first thing I want to do is allow a user to be logged in. So we'll set this value in a second. So let's go ahead and set some state. So we'll just go ahead and do user, and we'll do set user. So we'll set that value. This is going to use state, make sure it's imported. And before a user is logged in, we're going to set this value to null. So we're going to want to get the user, and then we also want to get the authentication tokens. So we'll paste that in, and we'll do auth tokens, and then we'll just do set auth token. So we have a value of this, or we have a value for that state, and then a way to update it. So this will be set auth tokens. I know if you aren't familiar with this at all, like the ideas of React, this might be a little bit more difficult. So that's what we're going to do right now. We first want to get these values, and now we want to allow a user to log in. And we also want to check if this user value is somewhere inside of our local storage. So do we have this token information in our local storage? So let's quickly just build out that login function here. So let's just go ahead and create this function. We'll call this login user. So we'll make that an arrow function. And we also want to make sure we add an async here, because we are going to use async await. We're going to wait on some network calls here. So we want to make sure that's set up. We're going to pass in the event here. And let's see. So the first thing I want to do is set the value of response, and we're going to use fetch here. So we'll just do fetch. And what we want to do is actually send some information to this value right here to get the token. So we're just going to add that in directly. So we're just going to take this link, and remember that this endpoint right here, if we go to the raw data, it just needs this media type of application JSON, and then we need to pass in a username or a password to that. So let's go ahead and actually send this information. So we'll add in that URL here. So we'll just go ahead and just use that directly right here. We're not going to set up a proxy URL at this point. And in this, we need to set some more information. So we're going to add in a comma, and we're going to set the method. The method has to be a post method. And now we want to add in some headers. So we're going to do headers. This is also going to be an object, and we're going to set the content dash type. And the type here is going to be application / JSON. We're just telling the backend, hey, this is JSON data. So we're just specifying the type of information that we're setting, or that we're sending. So now we want the body. This is going to be like the body of that post. This is the data that we're sending to the backend. And with fetch, we always need to do JSON.stringify. So we're basically turning this data into a string. And in JSON.stringify, what I'm going to do is send a username, and we're going to set that to null for now. And we also want to send a password. So we'll just do password. Just want to make sure my face isn't blocking the screen here. So the password will also be null. Okay, so let me clear that. So we set the method to post, we add the headers, and we send the username or password. So when we send this information, we want to be able to send this from the form here. So we're going to take this function right here, login user, and we're going to bring this into context data. So we're going to do login user, and we're going to pass in this value. So this is going to be the key value pair. We want to take this function and bring this down to the login page. There's different ways you can do this at this point because the context or the auth provider wraps the login page also. We want to be able to pass this information to the login page. So we add this in right here. Now in the login page, we can actually get this. So we're just going to do use context. So from the login page now, use context, and let's set this value. So we're going to destructure this, the response. We're going to get that login user function, and this is going to be use context, and we're going to do auth context, and that should automatically import this right here. So we have that function, and we want to go ahead and set that right here. So on submit, when this form is submitted, we're going to add an event handler. We want to fire off the login user function. So in here, in the function, I want to do e.prevent default. So if I submit that form by default, it's going to send some kind of request. It's also going to refresh the page. I don't want to do that. I want this method right here to handle all of this. So we're going to prevent the default, and let's just test this out. Let's actually console it out. So we'll just do console.log, and we'll say form submitted. And let's just comment this out right here. So I don't want it to send anything right now. So I just want to make sure that function is working. So we'll refresh it, or we'll go to console. Let's just do a refresh, submit that. So form is submitted, so it's all working and it's counting how many times that's happening. So that looks good here. Okay, so let's go back here. Let's uncomment all of this. We'll remove form is submitted. And we want to proceed with this. So to submit this data, we can actually get or use the event here, and we can actually get the form data directly from here. Again, there's different ways in going about this, but we can do e.target. So the target is the form, so we'll do e.target. And then we're going to get a name or a value from that target. We're getting the user name here. So that's why we specifically added the names, the password and username. So make sure you're using this value right here. So we're getting the username and we're getting the value of that username. So we're also going to do the same for password. So we're going to copy this, paste this into the password, e.target.password.value. So we're sending this data, and we want to get that response. So we're going to do let, and we need to add in a wait. So if we're using async await, we're going to do data, and this is going to be equal to await, and we're going to take that response here, and we're just going to get the response.json. So we're just going to parse that data, and we want to console this out. So we'll do console.log, and let's just get that data. So we'll do data. So what's going to happen here is we're going to submit the form, send our username and password just like we did from the front end earlier, and we should get back an access and a refresh token. So let's try this out. We'll do inspect. Let's see if it's all working. If we set up the cores correctly, it should work fine. I'm like so zoomed in, I'm trying to figure out how to fix this. Okay, that should do. I think you can see that. So sorry about the breathing there. So we'll submit that. And there we go. So we get back a refresh token and an access token. So we got that data. So that sent it to this URL or this endpoint right here. Make sure both servers are on and cores is configured. And now we got that information. Now it doesn't log me in because I can send that multiple times. It's going to keep regenerating that information. So we need to continue on with this process here. So let's go ahead and find out the next step here. So we can actually get response here. So let's console out response also. So we'll just copy this right here, and let's see what we have in response. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that the response was good. If everything went correctly, then we want to update our local storage and get these values and actually set this. So if I submit that, we have our username and password already added in there. We see the data and we see response. Now we see the status text, the status code. 200 means everything went good. We see our headers and our body. So we see all this information about the response. So we're going to get this response right here, and we're going to check if that was good. So we're going to do if response dot status. So remember, status gives us back a 200 if everything is good. We're going to set that to equals to 200. If everything goes good, we want to proceed here. Else, let's just go ahead and say alert, and we'll just say something went wrong here. So something went wrong. We're not going to worry about all the error handling right now. So something went wrong. And at least the user knows that something's not working. So if everything goes good, that means we got back the data, the username and password were good. We got back a token. What we want to do is use this set auth tokens value. And we want to go ahead and set this in our state. So we want to store it in our state and in local storage, because if we set it in our state, that means we can access this information and check if we're logged in through different routes in our application, like private route right here, because later on we're going to use our state instead of this hard-coded value. So we'll go back to this section right here. So if the status is good, we're going to get that response and set the tokens to data like that. So that's going to be the access and the refresh token. Now we want to set the user. So we're going to set the user, and this is going to be data.access. Now we want to actually get the user information. So let's go ahead and actually decode this value and store that user information. So we don't want just the token, we want to actually get that information. So remember when we went to JWT.io, and we added the token in right here and we got back that user information. So we want to be able to get this response. So we want to get access. So we'll take that entire value. For some reason I can't see it. So let's just quickly generate it. So we'll just go back to HTML form. So we'll get this access token, and I'm kind of, I guess, repeating myself a little bit, but I want to make sure it's clear. We're going to paste that in here. So we want this information as opposed to this token stored in the user's part of the state. So in one part, we stored the tokens. In another, we actually want that information. So there is a library that we can use called JWT, or NPM package called JWT.decode or JWT decode. So look this up. I believe it's this one right here. It's an NPM package JWT-decode. We're going to run this install, and all we do is we add the token into this function, and it will decode the token and it'll give us back that object right there. So let's go ahead and run this install. So you can use yarn. We're going to use npm in this case, whatever you're familiar with or comfortable with. And let's just go ahead and open up a new terminal and run that installation. Make sure you're from this front end folder. So make sure the file path is correct. While that's installing, let's go ahead and add in this import. We'll bring this in right here at the top. So import JWT_decode from JWT decode. So that all installed successfully. So we want to use this method now, and we're going to take this value and put that into set user. So instead of just passing in the token, we're going to get data.access, that's the access token, and we want to decode that token and then store that user information. So let's go ahead and save this. And what we want to do now is get this user information, and I want to actually pass this down into context data. So the token is decoded, added into this state right here. So that's going to be the user object, and let's go ahead and pass this through. So all variables will be added above and all functions will be added below. So that's just the way I want to store it. So we're taking this user and we're going to go back into login page. So, or not the login page, but the header. So we'll go into the header, and now we're going to throw user in here instead of name. So in this value, let's go ahead and do user.name. So I want to check this out actually. So what I'm going to do is take auth tokens. So what did I call that here? So we're going to take these, or we're going to check if we have a token here. And then if we do, then we're actually going to display the user. So we want to make sure that the user is actually authenticated. So let's do it this way actually. So we'll check the user value. So we don't need the actual tokens. So here we'll create a condition. We're going to use this condition right here. So we'll say if the user is there, then let's just go ahead and output the username. So we'll bring that in right here inside of these two curly braces. And in this case, we're getting username because that's how we saved it. So if we have a user, go ahead and bring this in. So let's check this out. If I log in, now we see hello Dennis and we see the user. So if I refresh it, the user is going to go away because I'm not storing this in local storage yet. So let's finish up in our header here. So we'll go ahead and check if the user exists. And then we also want to create a condition here. We're going to use the ternary operator. And we're going to say if we have a user, so we're going to create a question here. So if we have a user, then we want to add in a logout link. So we want to say logout. And in this case, we're not going to use the link value. So logout. We're just going to add in a paragraph tag. So at this point, we're going to add a paragraph tag and we'll just add in some kind of event handler. So that needs to be in the text, not in the to value. So we can also do an else value. And in the else value, this is where we're going to throw in login. So if a user is logged in, we want to add in the logout text. If they're not logged in, we want to prompt them to log in. And then we also want to display their name. So now we can use that context or our global state to actually check this information. So if I hit login or submit that, now we see log out. It's not working at this point, but you kind of get the idea of how that logic works. So what I want to do next here is actually make sure that we can stay logged in. So what we need to do is allow this to where if I manually refresh the page, we can stay logged in. So we need to fix this. So the first thing I'm going to do here is make sure that whenever a user loads the page, let's say they've already logged in, they come back the next day, we want to make sure that they're still logged into their application. So what I could do is just do local storage dot get item, and I can ask for the access token. So we'll just do auth tokens like this. So I can try to get the token from local storage. Before I do that, let's continue with this login method. So once we set this information, what I'm going to do is go ahead and do local storage dot set item. And in here, we can do key value pairs. So we can do set item, we'll paste in auth tokens, and this value will simply be the authentication token. So we'll just take data right here. And technically, I can only store strings in here. So we're going to actually have to set this as a string. So we'll just do JSON.stringify. And we're going to pass in data like that. So it's going to stringify it, and it will set it once we log in. So this information will be inside of local storage. And then we want to be able to get this information. So let's try this. So once that's done, we also want to use history here. So let's actually import that. We want to redirect a user to the home page. So we'll just do from React-router-DOM. Let's go ahead and do use history. So because we're not in a standard component, we need to use history this way. So we'll do use history. Make sure I got that right. And let's set history right here. So we'll do let history. And we'll set that to use history. And that's going to be the method. So we'll set that to const. So we're going to take history. Once a user logs in, we're going to set these two values, set local storage, and then redirect a user. So we'll do history.push, and we're going to send the user to the home page. So let's check this out. So our code is still a little bit broken, but we're just going through this step by step here. So if I open up my application here, if we'll go into local storage, we'll delete the original tokens here. I think that was there from before. If I hit login, so I have my credentials, make sure they're added there. We'll submit that. We just got redirected. We should be redirected to the home page. And I see what happened here. I'll explain what happened in a second. So we added the token in here. So now we have the access and the refresh token in local storage. So now if I refresh it, I'm always going to be inside of this page here. Now the issue is inside of our private route, we didn't adjust this to listen for this token here. So we want to fix that. So we'll we'll close out the header here. Actually, we'll leave that open. Let's go into our private route. And we want to check our authentication based off of what's inside of our state now instead of what's inside of this page here, or besides this value. So we're going to remove authenticated. And let's see. So we want to be able to get the user information. So we're going to import use context from React. So we're going to destructure this from React. Let's import use context. And we want to use the context. So we'll set this value to the user. And this will be use context. So now we want to check if we have a user instead of checking that authenticated value. So we'll just use AuthContext. Now we imported that. We have the user. Now we just want to say if we have a user, then allow the user to see this page. So we just wanted to change that up. Now if I log in, now I can officially see this page. But there's still an issue here because if I manually refresh this, I'm going to be logged out because the state was updated. Even though the local storage still has this value, we need to update the state when a user first opens up the website. So you see that the state is null until we officially hit login. Other than that, it's always going to be null. So we can get this value from local storage and we can actually update it directly in here. So we can do local storage, and then I'm actually going to write out the condition and update it in a second. So first of all, we want to check if we have anything in authentication tokens. So it's going to check the local storage and see if we have this value. If we have this value, we're going to create a condition. So if there's something in here, then what we're going to do, wow, I just completely stuttered. What we're going to do here is we're going to take that token, we're going to do json.parse. So it's the opposite of stringify. Let me just make sure you can see that. So instead of stringifying it, we're now going to parse it. We want to get back the object. So we're going to do json.parse, and we're going to parse that token. So we want to get these values back. So we're going to parse it. Once that's parsed, then we want to set the value, else we want to set that to null. So json.parse, that ends right here. The last value here is going to be null. So in get item, so we're going to do that right here, and we'll do null. So if we don't have anything, let me just try to recap this. We'll create as much space as possible. We check if we have a token. If we do, we get that token from here, we parse it, we get back the object, else the value is going to be null. So what we can do actually is get this value and throw that into uState, and something looks wrong here. So I want to try to fix this. So parse, I think I'm missing parentheses right here. Okay, I think that was it. So get item wraps all the way to the end right here. Okay, no, so json.parse wraps all the way here, and then get token. So I just wanted to make sure I had that wrapped completely. So in theory, what I could do is actually just take this value, I'm going to copy that, remove it, and paste it in right here. So this will either be null or that token. So I just pasted that in. So that is now inside of uState. So the initial value will be whatever is inside of local storage. So let me save that, and let's try this again. So let's see. We have some kind of issue here. So set user auth tokens, missing a semicolon. Where is this at? What line? So yeah, the zoom is kind of throwing me off. So we have uState local storage.get item. So I think that is supposed to be removed. Okay, so let's recap this one more time. I need to go slow here just so if I'm having an issue, I know someone else is going to have the issue, so I need to fix that. So uState starts and closes all the way right here. We have our question with the question mark right there. We have the condition, json.parse closes right there, get item closes right here, and then null. Okay, so let's save this and let's check this out. So now if I actually go to the home page, let's log in. If I refresh this, it should keep me logged in. Give me a second to try to figure this out. Okay, it's actually based off of the user object too. So we need to do the same for the user object. So let's take this entire uState value. Let's copy this. And we also want to get the user value from the state, because in the private route, we're trying to access the user and that is still empty. So that's why it's not allowing me. So we're going to paste this over this uState for the user, except for the user, we need to decode this value. So we're going to take this decode value. Let's bring this in right here. So json.parse. Instead of json.parse, we're just going to do decode. So we can just change that right there. And that should decode that value. I don't think I need to parse it. So let's try this. I think the parcel will work on its own. Let's try to go to the home page. And it looks like I made another issue, probably the same thing that I did last time. So let's check this out. Else null decode. Looks like I had an extra value there. Let's check this out again. Okay, so now when I refresh it, I can stay in the home page. So that actually works fine. And I can't log out at this point. So if I actually just delete that token and then refresh it, now I'm logged out. I can't go to the home page. But when I log in, it redirects me here and I can actually see this user's information even when I click this refresh button. So it persists that login. Now, I want to make this a little bit more efficient. And for uState, we can actually pass in a value directly. So we have the value like this. But what I want to do is actually use a callback function, because what's going to happen is every single time this component is rendered, or auth provider, as we navigate through our website, technically it's always going to be updating. It's always going to check the local storage, and I don't want to do that. So what I can actually do is take this entire value, and I'm going to copy this. So we'll copy it, remove it. Inside of uState, I'm going to use a callback function. So we're going to create an arrow function in here, and we're just going to simply set this value right here to the value I just removed from here. So now we use the function. So this means this value will only be set once on the initial load and it won't call it every single time. So we're gonna do the same for this. So we're gonna copy all of this right before the end, copy that, and let's add in that callback function. So we'll add in the function right here and paste that value in. So that's just gonna make it a little bit more efficient so it's not so expensive on the browser and always having to call that. Let's test this one more time. And now if I log in, everything is working. Okay, so before we start using that refresh token method, what I wanna do is just add in that logout functionality. Now this will be really easy here. All we need to do is add in a function that changes our state, removes that local storage or clears it, and then simply redirects a user. So let's just go ahead and create a function here. And in this case, I don't think we need to make an async function yet because we're not making any calls here. So we're gonna say logout user. So we're creating that function, we're setting that value, and in this section right here, what we wanna do is take this update method right here, we'll paste this in right here. So when logout is called, we're just simply gonna set these values to null. So set user, set auth tokens, this is gonna be null, and we can take this local storage value right here, paste this in, and we're just gonna do remove item. And the item we're gonna remove is gonna be auth token. So we're simply gonna remove these values. History.push is gonna send us to the login page now. So we'll just do login, and that's pretty much it for that function. It's actually really simple. We're gonna take this logout function, we're gonna pass this into the context data. We'll pass this through, and we want to add this to the header so we can actually access this. So in the header.js file, we're just gonna go ahead and destructure that. So we're gonna throw that in right here. So logout user, and then we'll just do on click. Let's call that function. So on click, call the function, and that should be it. So let's test this out. We'll refresh it, log out, we log out a user. Now we can't go to the home page. If I hit submit, now we're in there and everything looks good. So if I hit log out, you'll see the token right here get removed. So that's it for the logout function. Now for the refresh function, basically what we're gonna do is create a function. This function is gonna be in charge of simply calling the refresh token method. So remember that we have this method right here where we can take this refresh token. So that's stored inside of our local storage and the state. And we need to call every 5 minutes, we're gonna call refresh. So remember in the backend with Django, we have, actually that's in the other text editor. So make sure both servers are still on. We have this value right here. So the access token will expire every 5 minutes. So what I'm gonna do here is update the access token every, we'll just do 4 minutes. The reason why we're gonna do that is because it's unlikely, or it's gonna happen rarely, but imagine that if we're calling this every 5 minutes, let's say on that 5 minute mark at 4 minutes and 59 seconds, a user tries to make a request to some kind of endpoint. What can happen is this access token may take 2 seconds to respond. That's kind of a long time, but if it happens to delay, then that user is gonna have an issue. It's gonna log the user out and that's it. So we wanna make sure that the token updates before the user can make another request. So we wanna update it before that 5 minutes expires. And then once that's updated, the refresh token will be updated and we'll add another 90 days to that lifespan. So we're simply gonna add 5 minutes and 90 days to both tokens, or 5 minutes to the access token, 90 days to that refresh token, and it will blacklist the original token. So in this endpoint, we have the raw data. We need to send refresh token. We have to send the token that we got. We submit that. It's gonna give us a new token and then blacklist what we have. Okay, so we have the idea. Let's go ahead and build this in. So we have the login user method. We'll clean this up a little bit. We also have the logout user method. Let's go ahead and create this method to update a user. So we'll just do update token, and we're gonna add async right here, create the arrow function. We're gonna make sure it's an async function, set this value. And for this, what I'm actually gonna do is copy a little bit from here. So we're gonna take this response and data from the login method, and we're just gonna bring that down to the update token method. So we wanna add in refresh. Make sure you have a closing / there. We're sending a post request. We're sending this data, json.stringify for the body. At this point, we're just gonna send refresh like that. So remember, we need to send this right here. That's what it's asking for refresh. That's what we're going to send to the front end. And for this value, we're going to clean up the password and username. We want to get the refresh token from auth tokens right here. So that's stored in here. So we not decode it, but we store it as an object. So that means that when this update token method is called, we're going to go into auth tokens and we're going to access the refresh token. So inside of our local storage right here, refresh is not defined. We'll worry about that in a second. Here, let's just, let's see, where is that happening? So line 55. Let me just save everything right now. So, okay, so refresh is not defined. Where am I calling that? So I'm trying to see where it's actually calling it. Oh, that needs to be auth tokens dot refresh. I think that was the issue. Okay, so when we log a user in, we have these two tokens. Let me try to zoom in. So we have access and refresh. So we're going to send that token to the backend. So let's go back here. We send that token, we get the data, and all we want to do is simply update the data. So we're going to run that same test. We're going to check if everything went well with this update method. We'll say if response dot status. If this is good, so if that status code is 200, then let's go ahead and take these values, set auth token, or these two right here, or 3, and we're going to update this state, the user state, and local storage. So we're going to go ahead and update it if everything went successful. So we're going to call that method. Then we also want to create an else condition. If something failed, that means something was wrong with the token. We want to go to the logout method, and we just want to take these values from the logout user, and we're just going to call that right here. I guess I could just call the logout user method. So let's just trigger that right here. So that's going to shorten our code here a little bit. I don't think that's going to give us an issue. So we should be good. So this logout or the refresh token method is going to be called every 5 minutes. So to actually make this work, we need to use effect here and call this every 5 minutes. So let's bring this down here, and we'll just go ahead and write our use effect right here. So this is for our lifecycle methods. We'll do use effect. Inside of use effect, we're going to pass in a function. So we'll throw in a function right here. We'll bring that in, and we'll go ahead and add in a list of dependencies. For these dependencies, we're going to throw in auth tokens, and we also want to throw in loading, which we're about to create. So this means that on the first load of the page, this is going to be set to true. So we'll just do loading, and then we'll do set loading. So when the page is first loaded, we actually want to trigger this and make sure that we have a new token generated, and I'll kind of explain where the issue can come in if we don't do this. So loading is going to be true. So we're loading the page on the first load. Then if it's once we get that initial load, we're going to set that to false, and that's going to be in the dependencies. So in here, inside of use effect, let's go ahead and set a few values. So the first thing we want to do here is set an interval. So we'll just do set interval. So we're using the set interval method. This is built into JavaScript. And what we're going to do here is trigger a function. We're triggering this function. And in this function, we're just going to do if auth token. So if we have some tokens, let's go ahead and try to refresh this token. So let's just call the update token method. That's all we're doing. We're just checking if it's there, and we're trying to update it. Now let's go ahead and console something out here. So we'll just call console.log, and we'll just say update token called. So we just want to know every single time this method was called. So we just want to see this in the console. So we're checking if the token exists, and then we're going to call update token and make sure everything is running correctly. So we want to call this, let's just say every 2 seconds. So we can do 2000, it's in milliseconds, so that'll give us 2 seconds. And this interview method will be called every single 2 seconds. Now, with this interval, we also need to clear it. So we'll just do return, and we need to clear it. So we're going to call a function, and we're going to do clear interval. So clear interval, and I'll explain what's going on here. So with this interval, what's going to happen is on the first method, it's going to call this interval, and it's going to call this method every 2 seconds. Now, when we continue to navigate through the website, it's going to keep re-triggering this function, and it's not going to call it every 2 seconds. On the first round, it's going to call it after 2 seconds. The next round, it's going to call it twice, and then 8 times, and it's going to keep doubling until we get this crazy timeout error. So with set interval, we need to set this value, and this will be, or set the return value, and it actually returns back an interval ID. So we'll do interval like that. This is going to be an ID. So after we fire this, we actually want to clear this interval. And then as we continue navigating through the website, it's gonna make sure that it's always fresh and that we only have one cycle running. I don't know if that makes sense. You'll have to look into the interval method, and you'll probably find a lot of tutorials and documentation on why we need to clear it. So this will ensure that we don't just go through this infinite loop. So we get an ID from this interval value. It's going to fire off every 2 seconds, and then it'll clear it once it's done, but the interval will continue. So we're just making sure we're not reinitializing it every single time. So we call this method every 2 seconds. And let's check this out. So if I go back to the front end, let's go to the console. Let's refresh it, and it looks like we're actually running into some errors right now. So let's remove these 2 tabs here. Let's go ahead and open up port 3000. We're currently logged out. So at this point, it's not calling it, or it shouldn't call it, if we have no token. So let's see. We have the interval time. We say if auth token. So if we have any tokens, then we call update token. We set the time, and then we return that value. So update token should only be called if we have an authentication token. So let's go ahead and clear this right here. Let's go into our local storage. We'll clear it, and that should fix that temporary issue. Okay, so we're on the home page. If we go to the console, so let's refresh it. We're not seeing the update token method called right now because we have no token. So that's the first check. We check if we have a token. Now let's see why it's causing the issue. So if I log in, it automatically failed to fetch. Let's see, it looks like it's with the fetch call, uncaught promise. And let's check this out here. So we'll go into the update token method. Let's see what's going on here. So we check the status. If everything's good, we set the token, data.access. And I think it actually might be with a backend. So when we were making those requests, there's a chance that it might have turned off our server. So it looks like it did. So let's just go ahead and start that server again. So it seems like we're trying to make the request, and the request is failing because it wasn't even on. So let's go ahead and refresh that, and let's go ahead and give this a shot. So I'll try to zoom in a little bit. When we log in, we should now see the update token method called every 2 seconds. So at this point, we see it called. It's just going to keep updating it. It's been called 4 times, 5 times, and so on. So every single time that token gets called, the access token and the refresh token are updated in the local storage and in our state. So we typically wouldn't want to call it this often. 5 minutes or 15 minutes is a little bit more reasonable. So we'll update it once we're done with this testing. So what's happening here is we're calling it on that interval. And if we go into application, if we go into our local storage, it's kind of hard to tell, but if you focus on these characters here, let's try to zoom in a little bit left, you're going to notice a few change here every 2 seconds. So let's see if I can catch that somewhere here. So let's try to move this over. So it's sliding me over to the left because they are being updated, but I can't actually see which ones are updating. So it's updating the access and refresh token every 2 seconds. And this is how a user can persist on the website. So what I want to do here is I also want to make sure that the token gets loaded on the first load. So we're not going to see this issue right now, but I'm going to build something in so we can actually see it because it's going to be more practical to understand it. So when we go to our website, there's only 2 times at this point when our token gets updated. On the first one is when we log in. So we call the login method and the token is updated. And also when we call the update token method every 2 seconds, or later on it'll be 4 minutes. Now, what happens if we log in and we happen to leave our website, but our access token expires after 15 minutes? What's going to happen is we're going to try to log back in, and if that access token doesn't or isn't refreshed in time, and we're trying to make another request to the backend, maybe we're trying to get some user data or some kind of items that are related to that user, it's going to make a request and that token will fail because it's expired, because refresh only gets triggered every 15 minutes. So if you happen to leave, when you come back, we need to make sure that update token is called on the first load also. So I want to show you the issue before I fix it. So all we have to do is ensure that update token is called on the first load and then every 5 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever you want to set that to. So for this, we're actually going to go to the back end here, and I want to actually render out some user information here. So as you can see, the network calls are being made right here. So this is constantly updating. It's being triggered every 2 seconds. So let's update this so it's only happening every 5 minutes for now. So or 4 minutes. So we'll do 4 minutes like this. And this is going to be multiplied from 1,000 to, so 1,000 milliseconds. And then we're going to go ahead and multiply that against 60 and then 4. So 60, not 600. So that's going to give us 4 minutes, and we'll throw that in here. So now that call isn't going to be called all the time. And we'll actually revert this in a second to show you the error, and then we'll go back to it. So I just want to make sure to slow down those calls. So in the backend, let's pretend this is some kind of notes application. So we're going to go to our database. We'll build out a quick model here, and we're going to associate this information with the user. So it's a little bit of prep work here, but I also want to show you how to create protected routes on the backend. Actually, you know what? I don't think we need to. Let's see. Yeah, let's do it. Let's make this a little bit more practical. So we'll go into our base app, and this is going to be in base and not in API. So we're going to go ahead and create a class here. We're going to create a note. So this is going to be like a notes app. We'll just do models.model. We're going to do some basic prep work. So body is going to be equal to models.text field. So we're setting that value, and we also need a user. So we want to get associated information. So we'll say user, this is going to be models.foreign key. And we're going to set that to the user object that's built into Django. So I want to make sure to get this value. So the import is going to come from django.contrib.auth.models. And then we're going to import user. And this needs to be auth with a U. So we import the user model. We set that right here. We need to run some migrations. So let's just close all this out. We'll clear it. Python manage.py, make migrations. We'll add this to the database. Let's see what happened here. Models.model. Oh, okay. So there's a few things I need to set here. So I'm going a little bit too fast, jumped ahead of myself. So for a foreign key, we need on delete. This is basically specifying what's going to happen to this object when the parent is deleted. We'll just do set null for now. Okay, so actually we'll just do cascade. So cascade means that it'll delete it. So that's going to be good at this point. We also need to add in a default value. So in the database, because we already have a user, we need to set null to true, and that should allow us to migrate our database. So we're going to make the migrations and then execute those. So Python manage.py, migrate, and then let's run our server again. Okay, so we just added that to the database. I'm going to go to the admin panel. We haven't even touched the admin panel yet, but I do want to add some information from here. So we'll do from.models, import note. We want to register this. So admin.site.register. We want to register the note model. Now that means we can go to the admin panel from port 8000. Don't worry about this error. We're not worrying about the home page here or the landing page to Django. My user information should be pre-filled. I'm going to log in, and now we can see the notes. So we're going to create a note, and we'll just say wash car, save that. And I'm going to attach this to a user. So we're going to attach this to Dennis. Then we'll just do add note, clean room. And there's a save button on the right where my face is covering. So we're just going to click this right here so you know what I'm doing there. Also need to set a user, save that, and let's actually add in another user. So I want to show you how different users can have different information. So we'll add in a user from here. We'll say Tim, add in some kind of password. Let's confirm this. Okay, so we now have 2 users, so we'll add in a note to Tim. So we can see that there's 3 notes, and each user has a different note. So we'll just say learn how to code. So Tim doesn't know how to code. That's on his, I guess, to-do list or in his notes. So we have notes, 2 attached to Tim, 2 attached to Dennis. So let's go ahead and actually work with this in the backend. So we have these values, and this is why we created the serializers. So we're gonna have to do from Django.serializer or from rest_framework.serializers import model serializer. If you don't know what serializers are, they're basically a way of creating JSON objects out of Python objects. So we're going to serialize this data and then render this out. So it's a little bit outside of the scope of this video. So from here, we want to do from base.models import note. I'm trying to go as fast as possible here because this is prep work. And we'll just call this serializer note serializer. And this is going to inherit from model serializer. We need to add in the 2 minimum fields here. So we'll just do meta. And the model that we're going to serialize is going to be the note. And then the fields that we want to serialize is going to be all of them. So we'll just do all. And this is going to be the body and the user. So we have this serializer. Let's go into our views here. And we're going to import this. So we'll just bring this down here. So from .serializers, we're going to import the note serializer. Then we want to bring in the model. So from base.models import note. And let's create a view to actually get this data. So this is where that error would occur. So we're going to create a view here. We're going to call it get notes. We're going to pass in request. And we need to take this decorator and also add it right here. Let's add in the colon here. We'll do return. And then we'll just do response. And we're going to pass in serializer data. So the serializer object has a data attribute. So we're going to use this right now. So to start, we're just going to get all the notes. So we're going to do note.objects.all. And we're going to serialize these notes. So this is where we're going to get that serializer. So serializer. And that's going to be the note serializer. So we're getting this value. We're basically saying we're going to query the database for all these notes. We're passing these notes into the serializer, and we're saying serialize them, and many is going to be set to true, meaning there are going to be many notes to serialize. So we want multiple items. So we have the view. It's called get notes. We're going to save this. Let's go into our URLs here. We'll create a path here. So we'll do path. This is going to be API/notes like that. We're going into views.getNotes, and that should give us all the notes. So let's test this out, and eventually we're going to get a specific user's notes here. So we'll go here, we'll go into API/note, notes like that, and that should give us that route. Let's see what's going on here. I see what I did there. I wasn't supposed to add an API because that's already prefixed from the root URLs file. Okay, so here we go. We see all 3 notes here. So let's go ahead and actually make this a private route. So that's the first thing we're going to do. So in our views, we want to go into our decorators, and I believe this is permission classes. So from here, we also want to go into REST framework.permissions. And there are different types of permissions we can import. So the one we want to do is authenticated. So we can create our own permissions later. Some permissions only allow admin users to actually get information. In this case, we're going to say a user has to be authenticated. Now to actually work with this, we're going to go ahead and create this view here, or update this view. And we want to add in that decorator. So we imported it. So in this case, this has to be underneath API view. We're going to do permissions classes. And this is going to take a list. In this case, we're just going to throw in this permission. So we imported the decorator and then the actual permission. So if I save this, and that was in the wrong view, so I need to bring that down here to get notes. So what's going to happen here is if I try to go to this view and I don't pass in a token, that's the access token from the front end, it's going to block me. So I'm going to this view, but I have not passed a token. Now we could use something like Postman to test this. In this case, we're just going to go right from the front and send this token because it's kind of outside of the scope of this tutorial. I'm just trying to show you how to create a protected route and how to get a user. Now, before we actually try to get this route here, let's go ahead and make sure we only get the user's notes here. So with that token, the view actually knows how to decode that token based off of this decorator. So we can actually go ahead and set user to request.user. So it's going to get the user that is associated with that token. It's going to decode it. It's going to get the user object, and then we can go into user.note_set.all. So that's how we get all the children, and that will give us only that specific user's notes. Now we can't see anything because we can't even access that view because we're not authenticated. So let's go ahead and actually get this information from the front end. So we'll go into our application. At this point, we'll leave AuthContext open. We'll just go into the home page. So we're going to code this up pretty quick. So we're going to need use state. We're going to need use effect. And we're going to go ahead and create some state here in the home page. So we'll just set this value to notes and update notes, or set notes. And the state here, use state, this is going to be an empty array. So before we actually load this information in, it's going to be empty until we update it. Now, at this point, let's just go ahead and create some kind of list. So we'll create a UL and we'll create some LI items here. So we'll loop through the notes. We'll do notes.map, and we're going to pass in each note. We're going to continue on with this arrow function. So we're going to map through all these notes, and we want to create an LI tag on each iteration. So for some reason, it looks like it's not working properly. What am I doing wrong here? As I'm mapping through it, we do notes.map, we create the function. Oh, I did set notes. That's supposed to be notes like that. So we're going through this array, and we're just going to output a list item for each note. So we're going to do li, and we'll just go ahead and output note.body. Now, this is a little bit outside of the scope of this tutorial, but we do want to set a key here, or a key prop. We'll just do note.id. There is an ID automatically generated, and that's it. So if I go to the home page, we're not going to see anything here. So notes is not defined. Let's try to refresh this. Why is notes not defined? So if we go up here, that's note, so set notes. Okay, so I'm on the home page. We're not seeing any notes because we haven't actually made the request. So let's go ahead and actually make this request then. We'll just do use effect, and on the initial load, we're going to trigger this function right here. That's going to be the use effect. We're going to add in a list of dependencies. At this point, we're going to keep it empty, and we're just going to go ahead and call the get notes method. So we'll just do get notes. This will be an async function. We're going to continue on with this function. That's an arrow function. Make sure that that's set. And we're going to call fetch here. So we're calling fetch. We're going to notes. So this is the endpoint. So we want to go to this port 8000 API/notes. We want to get all the notes from this route. Now we also need to throw in some headers here. So the method here is going to be get. So we're sending a get request to the backend. So we're getting some data. In the headers, let's just go ahead and set this. I actually don't think we need content type, but I'll just set that just in case, even though we're not sending data, so we probably don't need it. Okay, so with these headers, we also want to send the token. So with the headers, we're going to go ahead and add in authorization. So we're throwing in authorization, and we want to throw in bearer. And this is where you can actually customize this. In the backend, in Django here, in settings, you can actually access how you get that token. So you can actually change this value, and that would change how it's accessed in the front end. So this is what we're using. So capital B right there. Make sure you're throwing that in, bearer, and then we're going to add in a space. And we're just going to add in a string value, just in case. And we want to throw in the token right here. So we're storing that token as we log in, and we're sending this on each request specifically to get information that's protected for a specific user. So let's go ahead and actually get that token. So we want to import use context here. Remember, now we can use that data in any part of our application. So we'll do let, and we want the auth tokens. So we'll get these values right here. So auth tokens, we're going to throw that in. We're destructuring that. We're going to do use context, and we're just going to throw in auth context. So that's going to run this import also automatically. We're getting the tokens. We're going to go ahead and on each request, we're passing in auth tokens dot access. Okay, so need some water here. Okay, so we're sending that token request, or we're sending that request on each call. Let's go ahead and get the response. So we'll get response. That's going to be a wait. Set that value. Let's parse this data. So we'll do let data is going to be equal to response.json. We'll get that response, and then we're going to set nodes based on that response. So we're just going to throw in data, and that should pre-fill our state. So we are going to run into a few issues. At this point, we should be good, but we'll show those issues and then we'll fix them. So if I'm on the home page, so let's log out, let's log back in. Let's see, is that call failing? Oh, I didn't add that into use effect here. So I need to trigger this. So get notes is going to be triggered right here inside of use effect. We'll call that. So on the first load, we're going to get those notes, and let's see. So axis is undefined. So let's try going to login. I want to make sure we're logged out. Let's try to log in. Axis is undefined. What's going on here? So it should be set auth tokens. Here, let me make sure my head is out of the way here. I want to make sure you can see everything. Sorry if I blocked that earlier. So auth tokens is brought in right here from use context. We should be able to see it. I'm not sure why we're not seeing that. I think we forgot to add in auth tokens in the context provider because we have it right here. It's definitely working, but I need to make sure that it's in the context data. Yeah, so I need to throw that in right here because that needs to be passed into the provider, and that's how we have access to it down through child components. So we need to fix that. Let's see. Okay, we have another error. Nodes.map is not a function. Let's check this out. So in home right here, it's definitely a function. Okay, so it looks like it's just trying to map through the wrong data. I forgot to add in await. So that should fix it for us. So let's try this right now. And if it's still giving us an error, let's just go ahead and try to go to the login page. We'll log out, we'll clear everything, and let's try to go back here. So at this point, it's all good. I'm logged in as Dennis, and I can get Dennis's notes. Now, if I log in as Tim, I'm gonna get Tim's notes. So Tim only has one note, Dennis has two here. Okay, so now it's time to show you some of those errors that I was talking about. So the first thing is we wanna make sure that we get a new token on the official load. So we use the refresh token, and I also wanna handle any errors that occur right here. So let's say that in our configuration in the backend, this was set to 5 seconds. So let's just do seconds here, and we'll set that to 5 seconds. So the access token only lasts 5 seconds. So if we log out here right now, let's go ahead and refresh that. We'll submit that, and we'll close that. So let's wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll just go to 6, 7, make sure we're waiting 5 seconds. Now let's try to open that up. So if I open this up, what's gonna happen is because we have not generated a new token, we're gonna try to use the access token that's in the browser right now, which has expired because it expires after 5 seconds. So I'm trying to replicate what a bad call might look like. So if I go ahead and open this up, we're gonna see this error again. So first of all, I want to add in some error handling right here inside of get notes, and I want to make sure that we only set this value if the notes are okay, if everything went well. So let's go ahead and create a condition here, and we'll just say if the response, and this is inside of home.js, so if the response.status is good, so only when that response is confirmed to be good should we set these notes. So we'll go ahead and take the set notes value, we'll add that in right here, and that will finish that request. Now, we also wanna check, we'll just do else if. We also wanna log a user out if something doesn't go good. So if the response status, we'll just do response.status text. So there's different values. You can go ahead and console out response. So Django will also return back a status text here. So there is a status text, and the value here is unauthorized. So that's the type of text here. We could just have it log out on any fail. So just go ahead and paste in that status text. I want to make sure you can see that. So if that response is unauthorized, because when we go to this route, it's going to give us this unauthenticated user or no credentials provided, and the status text will be unauthenticated. So if for some reason that fails, then what we want to do is just log out a user. So really quickly, we'll just go ahead and get logout, So it's already passed into our provider. So we'll do Logout User. We'll take these values right here. We'll go to the home page. We'll get that from our context right here from the provider. And we just want to log out a user. So if something fails, something went wrong with the token, we want to immediately log out that user. So let's try this again. We'll go to the React application. So we'll log in. Let's say that we closed it. We're waiting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So now the token should be expired. If we go to this page, it automatically logs me out. So that looks good. That's exactly what we wanted. Now, there's kind of a small issue with this is the fact that my token is expired. That shouldn't break my application. We should be able to get that refresh token and update it before we run into this, because usually when you come back, your token will be expired, not the refresh token, but the access token will be. So what I want to do next here is actually make sure that the user gets a new token whenever they first load their page. So inside of our auth provider, we only get a token when a user logs in, and we call the update token method every 4 minutes here. So we set that interval, but we also want to make sure that this method gets called when they load up their page first. So what's going to happen here is they still may have that valid refresh token, but the access token may have expired. And then in the home page here, we're going to try to make this call and get notes. The access token is not going to be valid, and it's going to log the user out. So before we make any calls here, we want to make sure that this is updated and we're ready to go. And we also want to make sure that everything inside of our auth context here is called before any component below it is rendered. So we want to make sure that all the calls are successful here, and then we let these components render out. So we're actually going to try to delay this. So inside of our auth context, we have this loading method, and loading is going to tell us if everything inside of our auth provider is done and ready to go, and if we can render out those child components. So we're going to update this. So loading is set to true by default when we first open up the website. And we're going to go into use effect here, and let's just check loading. So we're going to do if loading. So we'll check this value here. And if it's true, that means we're still needing to update our token. Let's just do update token. So we're going to call this, and that'll update the token. Now we only want to call this on the first method. So we need to set loading to false because we don't want to call this every time use effect is called. So inside of our update token method, we also want to go ahead and set loading. So we're going to check loading again. We only want to call this if loading is true. So on the first render, we're just going to go ahead and update it once loading is done. So we'll set that to false. So it's going to make sure that we either log our user out or we update a new token, and that should be good. Now, if our auth token is not there yet, what we want to do is add in a question mark here and make sure that we're not trying to get a refresh token if auth token hasn't been updated. So if we don't have anything there at all, we don't want to throw an error. We just want to log our user out. So this will throw an error if we don't have this. So this is a little shortcut. Instead of having to write a condition like if auth tokens refresh exist, then render this out. This is just a nice little shortcut to let us just make sure that we actually have something before we send it. So technically this call will fail and it'll log a user out if this doesn't exist, but that's a little nice thing we can do to fix that. Now down here, we also want to make sure none of these children render out before all this is complete here. So let's go ahead and actually check this. So we'll create a condition and we'll just check loading. So if loading is true, we're going to render out null, else we want to render out the children. So this is going to make sure that none of these items are rendered until auth provider is complete. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's try this again. So we'll go back to the website. Let's log in here. And we want to wait 5 seconds. So we'll just wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I just want to check this, make sure that our token is actually set to 5 seconds. So it should be expired by now because it's set to 5 seconds, but our auth or the refresh token is still valid. So if I try to refresh this page, we're still going to be logged in. So what happened is on the initial load, that update token method ran, and we quickly updated what we had in there. So we'll just go ahead and console this out so you can see it. So we'll just say updated token. So console.log, and we'll just do update or updated token. So let's go ahead and save that. And if I go back to the website, we'll go into inspect here, and we'll just check out our console. If I refresh this, we can see that update token is called and then everything else is rendered out. So we quickly go ahead and make sure that we have a new valid access token and everything is good to go. So that's it for this video. What I want to do is just go ahead and set all these settings back here. So I think a valid lifetime here would be 5 minutes. So we'll just do minutes here, and we'll just set that to 5 minutes, and we'll update our token every 4 minutes, or you can set that to like 4 minutes and 50 seconds just to make sure it happens before that token actually expires. So that's it for this video, but what I want to do next is actually use the Axios method, where we use that interceptor and actually update the token on every single request, and that way we're not setting this timer. So it's just a different way to do it, and I also want to try doing this with fetch, but it's going to take a little bit of customization, specifically doing this with React and how React hooks work. So we actually might have to write some of our own hooks. So I'm going to get to those videos. I'll see how this one works and see how you guys like this. Let me know in the comment section if you found different methods. I would love to get some feedback from everyone.